Welcome to the Nomad Futurist podcast, where ideas shape the future and visionaries redefine what's possible. Join us as we dive deep into the evolution of technology, society, and human potential, spotlighting the voices driving change and reimagining our world. Connect with us and join us at media.nomadfuturist.org. The future is a story we write together. Let's kick it off. Here are your hosts, Phill and Nabeel. Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is your co-host, Nabeel Mahmood from Kailua Kona, Hawaii.
This is your co-host, Phillip, Koblence, joining you from the beating heart of the internet at 60 Hudson Street in New York City.
And this is Phill Lawson-Shanks, currently from North Virginia.
And this is Rob Lawson-Shanks from Northern Virginia.
Brilliant. So we've got two Lawson-Shanks today. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So for our listeners, this is quite a surprise. It's something different that we have done before, that both father and son in the same room at the same time. And it's just wonderful to have both of you come out of the platform. So thank you very much.
I have one question to start with, which is, what is the plural of Lawson-Shanks? Is it Lawson-Shankses? We have
Legends.
two Lawson-Shanks. Legend.
Legend. There we go. Phil.
Two legend. I thought the British word for it was bellends, but
He's been working on his English, Phil.
Yes.
got it.
All right. So before we get started, so Phil, you are part of the Nomad Futurist Initiative. We've had you on the podcast before as well. But Rob, we haven't. So could you share who Rob Lawson-Shanks is at a high level with our users and listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Rob Lawson-Shanks. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Molg. We work on creating circularity in the world of electronics. And we do that with two ways. We build robotic systems that we call microfactories that disassemble end-of-life servers, laptops, industrial electronics to put them back and redeploy those critical assets into second, third, fourth, fifth life applications. And then we also work with our customers on designing for circularity and automation in sort of creating new products that have the design intent to be used many, many times over, ultimately reducing the big challenge we have around e-waste.
Brilliant. So one of the things that we really talk about is building that muscle memory, and you can actually really see this relationship with your dad and you being exposed to the sector. And I see that you actually got a degree in computer science from McGill. Could you share how you got exposed to the space, why were you interested in the space, and how you got in? And one of the questions that I would have, that would be the very tail end of it, is like, where did you get this entrepreneur element in what you're doing?
I have only one question in 27 parts.
I'm trying to be Phil Koblence here.
Well, so I was really privileged to spend quite a bit of my childhood here in Northern Virginia, and before some of the massive growth that we've seen, be brought into many of these data centers as they were being built, as we were bringing in racks, as we were taking out racks, and just kind of exposed to what these massive warehouse-looking things look like and all the amazing power and compute that's going on inside. Now it's so much even bigger than what we were looking at those many, many years ago. But I think for me, there was always something naturally. I was curious about building businesses, making things, creating stuff. And then I was thoroughly encouraged and supported to go out and do that. So it was always kind of almost pitching of, hey, I want to do this, and then breaking it down with you, Phil, and what I would need to do that. And we started several businesses from a young age. I started my first business at 10, and I was paid in Beanie Babies in the beginning. And that was through kind of DJing and video production. And I ran kind of that small kind of side hustle for almost 10 years into university. And through that, I built up the ability to build websites and produce videos and do larger corporate events and weddings. And it was a great way of kind of fleshing out, my abilities of operating and building a business. It was very small. That got me into building applications and apps during kind of the mobile app kind of push. And then ultimately I got into more kind of building startups that are venture backed and doing that. And so my last company there was in consumer electronics manufacturing, spent 7.5 years doing that. A huge amount of that time was spent in China in very, very large scale factories, building the latest, greatest, pushing all of that out into the world, only to kind of realize that we were again contributing to that massive 60 million ton problem of e-waste because of how we were designing manufacturing and ultimately lack of recovery. And so that's why we started Molg, our latest business. And then it was a natural progression there to take what I'd grown up in with data centers, see all the amazing things that are happening from a size and scale perspective in data centers and look at that as a unique opportunity to create more circularity in that space and design tools around that. So data centers and working with hyperscalers is kind of a core part of our business, and certainly the largest and fastest growing. So it was really taking some of those early learnings of just being comfortable in a data center and knowing what it looks like, and then seeing all the opportunity along with it, admittedly from a very different perspective than building and most of the industries focused on right now. Deploying more, we're very much on the back end. So Phill builds them up, and then I'm responsible, well, I'll say the robots that we build are responsible for helping take them all apart again and put them back into the economy.
The circle of life.
Exactly.
DLS was the least articulate Lawson-Shanks.
Well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. This is muscle memory.
I think there are trees falling for apples in this. I don't even know where to start. My question is going to be to Phill. As a child, do you try to make an effort to kind of bring Robert into our crazy world? Did he have like a proclivity that you were following and fostering? Or did you say, this is what brings home the bacon, as it were?
So that's a good point. So he's always been curious and interested, and I always encouraged that. So from early on, he had a real interest in videography. So we fostered that and edits. In fact, I thought if this all fails, he'd just be an amazing film editor because his skills were great. And that sort of followed through. He played lacrosse and edited all those and did reels for his teammates to get into university. But there was one point, I remember when Alibaba started, and there was a Wired article, I forget the editor's name now, but he went on to form 3R, the robotics drone company. That's it, yeah. And he was talking about how this amazing ability just to buy anything from the factories of the world. So we were talking about that. And Rob came back and said, well, if we can do that, he found a diagram for making flashing lights in sync with music. So this little circuit diagram and things. So I forget how old you were, maybe 11, 12. So I showed him how to use a soldering iron, and we went to Home Depot and bought some plastic, and I showed how to frost it and how to use a glue gun. And he made these little boxes so that you could take an iPod, because it was iPods at the time, as a pass-through to then a speaker to be plugged in the other side, and the lights were flashing. And he wanted to make this had this whole vision to make this as an industry, to make for all his friends who were going to college. And so we built several of those, and then realized that scaling was going to be a problem, which I think was an interesting, well, you can talk about that, but I think that was like, this is very cool. It's relatively easy to do. The problem isn't the manufacturing, it's the scaling of that.
Was that the impetus for automating the manufacturing process? Was because you wanted to collect more freaking Beanie Babies?
I did, exactly.
Yeah.
It all goes back to more Beanie Babies. Yeah, I mean, it is definitely learning by doing. I think is a deep kind of foundational principle that we have here at the company. It's something I've benefited from, and really knowing from what it takes to do something, and then how do you scale that to certainly when you start thinking about the size and impact of data centers, it's just so many orders of magnitude. So you really have to build in that capability early on, because yeah, in this case, it was people who were going to be really tough. I spent a lot of time in these factories, poorly lit, working side by side with people that do this. That's their entire lives. And that was not where I wanted the future of manufacturing of electronics to be, certainly. So I think it is better suited for automation, and how do we empower people to do what they're best at, rather than kind of repetitive rote tasks that ultimately, how do we empower them to better careers?
I think you're muted. You're actually muted. Like Phill, didn't they? Like a cabinet, like having grandma was their amazing.
Thank you, Phill. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How many data centers by the age of 18 had you visited? Did that take you to work?
Yeah, I think I went to quite a few. I mean, it was a very different industry then. I mean, there was kind of prop doors. There was people taking smoke breaks. There was not all the security infrastructure that's in place today. And I think that's good that that's come a long way. It was they just look like
Truth be told, I'm sure when they see your dad coming, they like fling the cigarette and then fling the Sure, he's the perfect person to test.
Yeah. A couple of companies ago, we were a big client of one of the biggest retail data center businesses here in Virginia, well, globally, but here in Virginia. And we had to do a lift and shift of, I don't know how many racks, hundreds of racks from 6 or 7 data centers into one new one. And I actually asked Rob if he and his friends wanted a job. to do that. We did it over a course of several evenings and it was arduous. But yeah, getting involved in that sort of thing, I think having an appreciation for, and it sort of demystifies what the internet really is.
The physicality of it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It takes it from this ephemeral thing that we have on our phones and our computers and everything, but it's physical infrastructure that's massive and impactful. I mean, we're here in Northern Virginia, in Ashburn. We can see these hyperscale data centers all around from our office, and our life is really about what comes out of those, and then how do we get the most value and save as much embodied carbon that's gone into building all of this stuff and putting it back into good use, as well as promoting digital accessibility, more low carbon compute options, all of these things that I think are pretty critical through this evolution of the industry.
So I can sense, I'm just picturing in my head before we lose this train of thought, the image of Phill presenting this idea that he has like a team of skilled, specialized movers. I mean, showing the lacrosse team and his son. And if that doesn't prove that anything can be sold with that damn accent, then nothing else will.
I think the only requirement was don't wear flip-flops. They had closed-toe shoes. That was all. Yeah.
Yeah, I think back in the day, you can pull things like that, not now. Rob, there's so much sincerity and commitment to when you talk about carbon neutrality or just the carbon itself. How, where, when did you develop that passion, or do you know what the basis of that is? Because that seems to be very generational, right? I mean, your generation seems to be more connected to the planet. Your generation seems to be more aware of the carbon issues that we are getting into. So could you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, definitely. I think certainly in high school, it became, we started an environmental club. We started really thinking about kind of extractive processes, the impact in terms of we kind of donut economics. How do we rise prosperity across these different kind of range of people within the planetary boundaries that we have? For me, it was just reinforced by what I was seeing from a manufacturing perspective. And we think if we're only thinking in this linear take, make, waste kind of process, we cannot build the infrastructure that we need to sustain this next level of compute without reusing more of what we have and doing that without compromise. So how do we bring kind of the latest and greatest technology to be able to do that? But it's been something that's been, I guess, now 20 odd years of my life and something I've been thinking about a lot. I tried to bring in more circularity and sustainability into previous kind of manufacturing work that I've done. It's just really difficult because everything is highly, highly optimized for kind of this one-way path. And so, yeah, I think it comes from a deep desire to build for the next generation and what it means for, I have a 8-month-old daughter now. So what is her life looks like? And if we continue on this path, we're already seeing the impacts of kind of climate change today. How do we turn that instead of kind of this massive challenge into an opportunity and really create benefit through circularity and sustainability, rather it being just kind of a cost and a burden to us all and us having to make kind of compromises and using technology to kind of right that kind of delta?
I mean, I think the thing that's amazing about just your perspective on it, and we try to reinforce this with kids that we speak to all the time. And, I've had the benefit of talking to large groups with your dad as well. This concept, and maybe it's born out of the experiential learning element of it, but this concept of people's lived experiences being their secret sauce, like seeing the way things work and knowing that if you make these adjustments, looking from the outside, looking in, not necessarily being an expert in a particular field, but just understanding how something works. Was that something, Phill, that you attempted to instill? Is that just born out of the ingrained curiosity that's embedded in your DNA? How do I make my children feel that way? I think inherently my children also love to solve problems, but I don't think they have that same kind of drive to think that they have the solution to the problem in the way that Rob appears to have had from a very early age.
I've always tinkered with things. Maybe that's it. He's been around that. So I've worked for computer companies for as long as he's been alive. So we always had stuff at home. I had a small rack of servers running the house. I played around with early, much to his mother's chagrin, early home automation that never really worked. You could argue it still has problems.
Partially worked.
And it didn't even partially work there, but I had things plugged in that then I'd had to go and fiddle with. But I was always messing with things, and he was always exposed to that. And we were always fixing the car or something, just anything that was mechanical. I've always had an interest, and he had that as well.
the accessibility to it all certainly makes
Yeah.
it easier. And kind of to your point, Phil, just kind of understanding what is possible. What does these things look like in a practical sense? Being able to put your hands on things. It's so impactful. Just it demystifies it to such a great extent, and actually having kind of seeing things through those end of life, having kind of all the old laptops you would bring back, all the old computers, and really them being kind of a low value in the sense that I could play with them and it wouldn't be a big deal if they broke. How do I take apart a computer, try and put it back together, and it's not a huge problem if it never turns back on again? That's a privilege, certainly. And certainly I'm very grateful to have that exposure. And then also seeing kind of what that bleeding edge of technology looks like and all the things that it could do.
Yeah.
Not necessarily what it can do today, but what it could do.
Yeah.
So it is that forward belief in technology and using it for good and seeing how it can drive kind of long-term change.
Yeah. So just the innovative part instead of innovation, instead of invention. So the thing with the DJing, you came back and you said that you had this gig to be a DJ. It's like, well, that's great. How are you going to do that? And he said, well, I'd already ripped all my CDs onto a notebook. So that was sort of running in the house. And you're like, well, you have the music.
Yeah.
And then we cobbled together an old amp and some speakers and put it on literally a kitchen trolley. And that was the DJ rig. But that view of there's a problem, we have all this stuff. Let's see if we can work out a solution, which rather than just, we need to go and buy things or I can't do it. It was much more sort of, let's just roll the sleeves up and see what we can do.
Understanding the timing of all this, I imagine it went more like, I need to be a DJ.
Yeah. If I remember, you actually said you've got the music. I mean, because I was thinking, you can be a DJ? How on earth are you going to do this?
Yeah. Luckily, I was benefiting from not having to lug around a bunch of vinyl.
That's true.
From that kind of first wave of digitalization.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think trying new things, taking those risks, having supportive kind of parents that will knowingly kind of help you out if you bite off more than you can chew. And when you're very young and the opportunity cost is pretty low, just going and trying a bunch of things and putting yourself out there, learning what you like, learning what you don't like. I think those are really amazing skills to learn at a young age. Having a gift of really understanding what gives you energy and creates excitement and kind of the unboundless energy that you can apply when you find a passion and a skill that you're good at is just an incredible gift. And I think through all of the experimentation, through all of the building, it was great. I mean, on the DJ business, I also learned a bunch of other auxiliary skills that I never would. My mom made me do my own contracts. So even that first gig, 10 years old, I had to read the contract, I had to sign it. And that contract evolved over kind of 10 years. But it gave me appreciation for, okay, you're now 15 and now your client is asking you to extend 3 hours into 3 a.m. in the morning on a Saturday. What's your rate change, from post midnight? And those are things that you
not you better come home. Are you crazy? You're not even going to accept it. What's your rate change?
Right. Exactly.
That's where
the premium you're getting.
I, as your manager, what's my?
It's just the roadie. I mean, sometimes when there was weddings and drunk middle-aged ladies took more of an interest in a 15-year-old young man behind the desk. Yeah.
It was definitely the less glamorous side. It was not the Avicii. It was the spending hours lifting extremely heavy equipment up and down basement stairs. That's kind of the lived experience of all of that. But it was a great job and I learned so many skills through working with customers and people skills, just getting stuff done, showing up on time, making sure your contracts were good. Those are all kind of priceless things that are really...
We should get him out of retirement to host like a Nomad Futurist bash. Brilliant.
But so
Make the return after decades away from these.
well, maybe when we throw the next big party. 3 takeaways I've got from you thus far: experience, exposure, and accessibility. Phill, question for you. I mean, I think between you and I, we do a crazy amount of travel. I think that's probably how our lives have been for decades. How did you manage to be present and provide those experiences to Rob?
That was a challenge. That was a huge challenge. When we first came to Virginia, I was part of a team to rebuild what was WorldCom. And I was in meetings back to back to back. So most of my evenings were working, and literally there'll be a wireless phone on the table at dinner time. And that was it. I was virtual daddy for a lot of it. But the weekends, I tried to be very present. But it's a challenge. It wasn't great. But I remember, and I don't know how old you were at the time, but I remember saying to you, I'm so sorry, I'm traveling so much. And you said, and I'm sure you must have heard someone say it, but you said, that's okay, Dad. I know that your job sustains my lifestyle. And I say,
That was a 15, wasn't it?
No, I was younger than 15, much younger than 15. Yeah, but I've traveled a lot. But we talk about things, and it was all, I'd encourage, we had lots and lots of conversations about how the world works in minutiae detail. We go and look it up. I mean, I pre-internet, I bought the Encyclopedia Britannica, which I still have, and that was my source of knowledge. But we would just talk about how things work and could they be better. And he would challenge me a lot on a lot of preconceived ideas I had. But it's really difficult when you're building businesses to be around for your kids. And I missed out a lot, that I know.
So leading into that,
pretty open then.
yeah, so leading into that, I mean, what advice would you give people today that have these young people coming up? I mean, you look at what the Silicon Valley has done, the .com has done, what data center has done for people and people's lives. What advice would you give the parents today? Because what I'm seeing right now is like
There's one sitting literally right next to him that is building his own business with an 8-month-old child.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes. So what would you tell Rob? Like, what would you do as a new parent, where you're still able to provide those experiences and give that accessibility to your children, that they come into that space, that they don't feel that it's creating that family gap or create that level of resentment, like you're always on the go, you're always working. What would you tell the parents?
Yes, it's a challenge. I mean, you have to understand what your priorities are, what you're trying to achieve. Fortunately, I had no interest in sports or golf. So when I wasn't working, I wasn't away doing that. So I was home, but it's a challenge. You have to be very honest. And
I think that's key. I think you treated us like adults in the sense that it was a very clear, you explained what you do, you involved us. Like we went to the office sometimes on the weekends when you needed to do that, and we would hang around and, take the scooters around the Welcome building.
Don't tell them that.
But I think you always treated us as adults, and you expected us to be able to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And so I think that's how we try and think about it now, is involve your children as much as you can, have them kind of appreciate what you do. Maybe they won't appreciate it, but at least try and give them an understanding so that there's less of a divide there. And then, I think maybe it's because I just repeated back something you said to me, but it was kind of the understanding of the why you were doing it. And I think that was something that was a good learning to have really early on. And there's different times in your life, right, where you're going to have to do extra things.
Do you recall a time where you actually felt resentment that he missed something, a big lacrosse game or something like that?
you asking this question?
No, he's sitting right next to you. Phil, can you move the camera shot?
I have to get on the couch and lean back a little bit here. But no, I think, no, not really. I mean, nothing really comes to mind. I think you were always pretty much there, or there was a good reason why you weren't, and you explained it, and you weren't hiding away from it. I don't think it was ever lent away. It was kind of very direct and transparent and upfront on these things. And so at least there was a good open dialogue. You talked to us a lot. I think that was kind of key. And you treated us like adults. No.
And you grew up with you grew up with one sibling in the house?
Yes, a younger sister.
And she is in the tech space as well.
And yes, exactly. Can we actually have her here? Bring her.
That sounds like the Dr. Phil show now.
I had one chance. I meant it.
Yeah.
What's the age difference between you and Kezia?
2.5 years.
All right. So you very much grew up with similar exposure and ended up following, maybe not the same paths, but certainly embracing technology.
100%.
So Rob, if it wasn't for technology, what would you be doing?
I don't know. I think I've always liked building. I think there was an idea maybe really early on in like architecture and green architecture and building kind of ecosystem design, holistic ecosystem. But I think it was probably always going to be in some kind of technology. I think it's just kind of who I was. I used to get pulled out of different classes at my school to go fix AV problems or IT problems for other teachers and things like that. I was being exposed to a lot of things that were like adult jobs early on, just gave me a really good breadth of skill, and that just created more opportunity. And so then it became a really fortuitous feedback cycle, like learn new skills, get new opportunity, do more interesting things, get choice of what you spend your time and energy doing. And the more kind of skill and talent you can have, you get more ability to choose how you spend your time. So those are all really good feedback learnings. And again, through that exposure, accessibility, I had an experience at a young age.
And demystifying and no fear of making mistakes, really. I think a lot of people who use technology, they're worried about breaking it, I think, and it doesn't work. But yeah, just reboot or pull it apart and take it apart. Yeah.
And even broader, I think you did a pretty good job in terms of outside of technology. Like, I know there was decisions that I made to go visit a girlfriend in a snowstorm that you definitely thought was a bad idea, and you let me do it anyway.
Even though you did bend the Land Rover.
I did bend the car in the process, but it was like a good learning, and there was not a complete bollocking of it, through it. And, that trust, I think it's something that gets built up over time, and you do it incrementally. But yeah, you gave me opportunities to kind of fail, and then we talked about it and what were the learnings. And I think that was definitely very helpful.
Clearly it's impacted Phill more than Rob, since he knows like make, model, year of car. It was a car. It was or was it 2004?
Well, then you should, if you ever talk to Katie, ask her about the Land Rover, because it was
never quite the same.
Never quite the same. No.
It was repaired, not remanufactured.
Yes, yeah. I don't repaired. It was made good, kind of. Yeah.
Functional.
Yeah. She drove it for a long time and wasn't happy. So
So, Rob, you picked up computer science. Was that influenced by these experiences? Was it something else that you wanted to study? I mean, I heard that you wanted to potentially look into architecture as well. And if so, what would those choices have been?
Yes, I think, computer science, it was kind of through learning my own lack of knowledge, through trying to build things and just get stuff going, and realize there was this whole next level of learning to be done. I did do some environmental science work. I should disclose, I did not finish school. I left school actually to do my previous startup. And that was, again, a conversation that we had going into my then senior year of, does it make sense to go and join this startup as a co-founder or continue on the path? But ultimately, it's where I wanted to be post-school, and the opportunity was there, and we were able to get funding, and that was an amazing opportunity. And there was always could go back to school if it made sense. That's now been 10 plus years ago, and I have zero intent of doing that now at this point. But yeah, I think computer science, having a hard skill that you can apply to unique problems is really interesting. I think if now in retrospect, in the amount of hardware and robotics that I do, I think engineering could have been a fantastic option of their physics. I certainly don't have the capability to do something like the pure mathematics of it all, but those practical things. So computer science was a great option. Engineering would have been good. And I think environmental science has come a long way in terms of how climate tech has evolved and how you use these hard skills to solve these kind of existential problems that we have. Those are deeply interesting to me. And I would certainly encourage anyone that's thinking about what they spend their time and energy learning. First off, learn how to learn. I think that's the key. And once you have that skill, then you have a lifelong pursuit of learning. And that can happen at different ages. I think luckily, even before I went to university, and still through all the things that we've talked about, I had a good sense of learning how to learn, and whether that was in a formal or an informal setting. And I had the tools and information available that I could go and pick up these skills just myself.
Just one thing while we're on that, but loyal followers of our show will know that your dad was not a huge fan of his time in school. And I wonder if, obviously you had this opportunity and you took it, but did you actually enjoy schooling, and did Phill, your experience not really appreciating school and finding then it was as a consequence of dyslexia and otherwise, did that inform how you approached Rob's and Kezi's, approach to schooling?
Yeah. So we started schooling in Texas. Well, actually, we started school in the UK, but then we came to Texas and you had to start again because you start school a year earlier in the UK. So that was interesting.
I don't understand this funny accent. They got to go back.
Exactly. But then coming to Virginia, it was before the big boom. So the school was tiny by comparison. There were a couple hundred kids there. And most of the teachers drove in from West Virginia because it was relatively close. And obviously, they could earn more money teaching in Virginia, and the cost of living was much lower in West Virginia. Then there was a huge boom, but it was
It's a small school.
Could have impacted.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're very involved in that because obviously being dyslexic as well, it's an inheritable trait. It made me very conscious of the schooling. But
We did testing really early on.
Yeah.
I would say, because you were
Right.
you were dyslexic. So before it was in kindergarten, by the time I had even finished kindergarten, it was already established and tested that I had dyslexia. And that gave all the kind of educational benefit of then learning with that known kind of predestined to kind of have these different ways of thinking, different ways of learning. And I think you helped educate some of our teachers and all of that on where the things I need to lean into. But, I had to go during reading hours and sit behind the teacher's desk with huge headphones and listen to phonics for like hours, whilst everyone else had kind of free study times. But I think those things really paid off because it was just kind of leaning into what we knew was going to be more challenging. And then I would say I was able to, compensate for those things. Just, I have to work harder. Even now, I have to read an email 4 times before I send it, or get my checkers to do it from Grammarly or ChatGPT to proofread stuff. And I just know that's what I need to do. That's what I need to be to operate at a similar level. And then I have all these other amazing gifts through dyslexia that far outweigh some of the minor nuances of how I just make sure I'm not misspelling things. I'm certainly not going to be entering any spelling bees, but that's luckily not a large part of how I've set up my life. So that doesn't come up very often.
so what I really wanted to make sure that he and his sister understood what it was rather than, because teachers are very influential and it just takes the teacher who doesn't understand it to be very critical and demeaning of a difference, which can be devastating. But if you understand, it's like, hey, there's a reason I struggle with this, it's this, but I can do all this other stuff, which is much more interesting, much more valuable. Sure, I'm gonna have to work harder. It set them up so that they weren't going to be ridiculed and called out and sent to the corner with a dunce's cap on by a teacher.
Right. I think the concept, it was one thing to hear your story and how you, like much later in life, as a security guard at British Airways, realized that the way your mind worked was in this unique way. But if there was some like evidence-based, I don't know, a huge segment of the population, I have you two, to suggest that dyslexia is a superpower, you two are emblematic of the fact that the way your brains are wired, it's not only fascinating, it is incredibly relevant and valuable. And look, my kids are significantly younger, 7 and 11, and we were in Brooklyn at private schools, and we knew of friends at these like incredibly, call them woke, call them modern, whatever, schools that embrace all elements of the Montessori method and experiential learning. And they had all unbelievable challenges when dealing with like a misdiagnosis, or not just thinking that it might, like dyslexia might be the cause of someone that's struggling in a particular way. And you find them trying to put this square peg in a round hole in a way it's devastating to know, just like you said, what that impact is. And had you researched that dyslexia was an inherited trait on your own prior to having children, or did you just think of it afterwards? How did that go?
No, actually, I was in the UK and I was flying up to Glasgow I was a compact flying up to the manufacturing plant, and someone had I think it was like the Times or some big broadsheet newspaper in front of me to the side. And there was this big headline about Oxford University doing studies on brain chemistry and dyslexia. So I jotted it down and I contacted them, and I actually went there and spent some time, had some brain scans, which some really, really dodgy MRIs. I think they were self-built MRIs. But that was fascinating. I spent a lot of time with amazing professors who were looking at the causality and the genetic makeup. And it's all, in essence, it's an inability to absorb long-chain fatty acids. But that's the cause. But it has this enormous impact on how the rods and cones and not sort of rods and cones, that's an eye thing, but how the columns in the brain stem and around the brain, how the neurons are connected, the spacing of them, and then the impact of the frontal lobe and all that. So yeah, my mother's dyslexic and her father's dyslexic, and they didn't know until much later,
Right.
as I didn't know. So it was very important for me I wanted, if they were dyslexic, and they are, that they understood that it wasn't something to be ashamed of and hide. There were challenges, but they were surmountable, and there were huge benefits in the way they see the world. Yeah,
The proof is in the pudding, and you two, my friends, are the pudding.
Absolutely. So, Rob, from your perspective, I'm knowing that, and the problem that we have in the society is that it's looked down upon. So, knowing about that early on, how did you deal with it? I mean, did you have challenges with your friends, with your teachers, with the people around you?
Yeah, I think knowing it at an early age was a really good gift because it created a reason why there was things that I was going to just be harder for me. I think I had to, at times, I was in kind of accelerated learning programs, but then there would be certain classes that I would go to special education rooms that were like the back closet in the school, right? And a wide spectrum of neurodiversity in the settings. And so it was a bit of an impetus to say, okay, I really need to get my hands around working with what I have and what's it going to take to kind of bring it back up to par and then ultimately accelerate beyond that. And luckily, there was a good conversation, highly supportive. And that was all kind of through Texas and Texas elementary public schools, Virginia public middle schools. But I think by the time I was kind of in 6th, 7th grade, I had managed to get to all accelerated learning across all of my classes. And it just, again, it was going to be a challenge, especially when you do like read around the classroom and everyone passes off popcorn reading. Like those are horrendous experiences for someone with dyslexia. And you're trying to forward predict like which paragraph you're going to have to read. And you're trying to reread it so that by the time it gets to you, you already know how to read it. You know, how are you going to absolutely butcher these pronunciations of words that you don't know? And I know I understand words differently. And I still will frequently have to rhyme words to remember how to spell them. So I just have like different ways of working through these things that I can do quickly that then don't put me in these awkward situations where where I forget how to spell cat, you know? And it literally can be that basic. And so just kind of knowing what that is and creating these little different mechanisms are super helpful that most people deeply surprised that when I tell them I have dyslexia and I tell my colleagues and they're like, oh, I would have no idea. But if I know I shoot a text quickly and I'm not thinking about it, it's most likely going to have a bunch of typos in it. But so that's fine for my friends and they know that. It's not great for my investors or my board. So I'm going to have to read it 3 or 4 times before I send it. That's totally fine. It's just, you just build it into the process.
Yeah, I can't really relate to this, but I can tell you this, speaking the actual English versus this American English and writing in American English is a bloody pain in that.
You know, I feel like the minority here. That's what.
So great story. And thank you very much for joining us. The takeaways, like I said earlier, exposure, experience, and accessibility. What would you tell the younger generation? Why should they actually look into this sector? And it's much bigger than how it's portrayed, right? I mean, it's just not designing, building, and operating data centers. It's everything that connects the world from networking to bits and bytes, server storage, telephony, whatever the case might be, and applications, therefore. What would you tell the younger generation that are users of all these applications and technology to potentially get into the space, and what is the future like for them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure many of your guests have had much, more sophisticated answers, but there's many ways of getting to the space. It's a massive industry. For us, we deal with the things that come out of data centers, at the very end. It's a completely different section, but it gets you involved in so much of this important work. I mean, compute will likely become a basic human need and a right that we need to have. So it's going to impact your life regardless if you know what a data center is or not. So lean into it, understand what it is, try and demystify it, and then appreciate all the various ways that you can contribute to the growth so that we're building it in a way that's great for everyone. And it's building the future that we want rather than just being, reactive to this. It's going to happen whether we want it or not. So get involved and help build it into the thing that we want it to be rather than be a passive bystander. And you can bring so many different interesting skills to the space. And there's great career in all of this. For those that are interested in robotics and how that works with data centers, welcome to find us at Molg. And, we're based in Northern Virginia and we want to get as many smart, interested people that want to get involved in this. So we're an open door and we're there as a resource. And we have a lot of great young engineers that are getting started in this space because we had the benefit of all this early exposure as we've just talked about.
I mean, I think that is exactly the key, right? The experience you had with dyslexia at an early age, the experience you had understanding the tinkering that your dad was doing with the broken home automation at an early age. It's basically just providing some type of integration of what it is that powers this digital world and giving students earlier and earlier exposure to it so that it does not seem like this scary world where even now, like software engineers that are coming out of college now are scared of actual servers because we have obfuscated the software from the compute so far that they don't know that those two things go together. So it's incumbent upon us collectively, Nomad Futurists and all of us that are in our industry, to kind of remove that veil of fear. You know, the word demystify, we overuse it. I think we could have had a drinking game in this podcast about how it was used, is absolutely true. And just your guys' perspective on it is fascinating and brilliant. And I think it's going to do a lot of good out there. So thank you so much for coming up.
Our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
What's that one takeaway you want our listeners to get from this experience and this podcast?
Yeah, I think we have an opportunity to build kind of what the next evolution of this looks like. It's happening today. The only way of doing that is to get involved and be the change from the inside. So get involved in the ways that line up with your skills, learn new skills. There's a bunch of people, I've only met extremely friendly people through this community. It's still relatively small, and we need that to be much bigger, much more diverse, much more equitable if we're going to build this next potentially human right of compute that's going to be even more impactful to our lives. So here as a resource, as someone doing something from the sustainability and the robotics angle and available, and then just encourage everyone to kind of follow Nomad Futurist and support all the work that you guys are doing. It's excited. It's a real privilege to be part of the conversation.
Brilliant. Phill Lawson-Shanks, you've done an amazing job. It's got to be, I would imagine, one of the proudest moments for you. What do you have to say to that?
I'm very proud and incredibly grateful, and I will be paying you the money. Just to rip it, so with your kids, just explain things, be accessible, and I hadn't actually thought about it, but yeah, so when you want to do things, and I'd say, is that really the best thing to be doing? Do you really want to do that? Because these are the consequences I see. What do you see? And you go and do them, and then you're held accountable for the consequences, good, bad, or indifferent. So that's important, because that's a really major life lesson. You're not going to get bailed out by people. You have to accept that you really screwed up, or something was spectacularly successful, and
Do it when you're young. When they're
do it when they're young. Yeah, do it when they're young. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. The experience costs are much lower. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Except the Jaguar, Speed Rogue, the Land Rover.
Oh, now it's coming up.
Can we list all of the cars that Rob Lawson-Shanks is running?
my insurance premium for this podcast.
It's repurpose, Rob. I'm fully supporting that. Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's never too late. Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Thank you for joining us. It's never too late. Make your investment, spend time, and expose experience, and make technology accessible. Rob, Phill, it's been amazing. Thank you for being a part of the journey.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us on the Nomad Futurist podcast. Remember, technology, markets, and challenges will continue to evolve, but those who adapt and prepare are the ones who will thrive. Embrace the change, stay curious, and let's build a future worth moving towards. The journey has just begun, and we're glad you're here with us. Visit us anytime at media.nomadfuturist.org to stay connected and be a part of the movement. Until next time, keep exploring.